Testing this one.
Okay. Yeah.
Testing, testing. Okay. Hey, Don, can you see and hear?
Go ahead and find your seats.
Give me a thumbs up if you can see it and you can hear it.
Welcome. Good afternoon to the 1st District Congressional Candidates Forum sponsored by the Clinton County Regular Republicans. My name is Todd Banducci, and I will be your moderator for today's event. I would like to start us off with a prayer by Mr. Luke Summer.
All rise, please. Bow our heads and pray. Our Father in heaven, we thank you that we have the freedom that we do to gather together, debate issues, and listen to issues, choose candidates for our own choosing, to go to the halls of government to make decisions on our behalf as our representative. We thank you for the freedom that we can gather here in peace, agree to disagree agreeably. We ask that you bless this meeting, bless the candidates, bless this audience as we give this meeting. Turn it over. Amen.
And now to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, Mr. Tim Cassidy.
Ready, begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Didn't that sound great? Great to live in a free country. All right, first I'd like to introduce the 6 candidates that we have today. This is in no particular order. This happens to be the way out on my sheet. What I'd love for you guys to do is wave at them as I call your name. This is the way it's going to go today. It's going to be kind of random. We're going to start off with questions, and each candidate will have the ability to be the first to answer a question. And they'll all get to be able to be the last to answer a question. So some get to be original, and some might get to be repetitive. So we think that's the fairest way to do it. So as I call your name, Mr. Nick Henderson.
Power went off when I pushed the button, nothing happens.
Mr. David Leroy. Mr. Michael Snyder. This is Mr. Gary. And Mr. Russ Fulcher. Going forward, I'll call them Mr. in their last name, or in Christy's case, Mrs.
Maybe it's dead already, huh? He charged it.
For the candidates and the audience's edification, and to try to manage expectations and try to keep surprises to a minimum, we do have a few ground rules today, and I'd like to go over those now. The candidates have seen these ground rules, but I want to just refresh their memory so that they're ready to go. They're not caught by surprise on the questions. What we're going to have today is a forum that we want to stay very positive. We want to have you tell us your positions, why you think that way, what's your justification, and we don't want to be negative or attacking today. We want each of you to speak for yourselves. We would appreciate if there's no waxing philosophical or pontificating or bloviating, as they say. In other words, be concise and specific as you can, because as you are aware of your responses, the time will be limited. One of the things we would ask also is please don't repeat or fall back on talking points. Try to stay on topic and answer the specific question. We have determined that if you're not answering the question or violating any of the other conditions for that particular question, we may cut you off. The candidates, for the beginning, when I'm done giving the ground rules, will have 2 minutes each her introduction, opening statement, that I will be asking 4 questions that you've all seen previously. And for these first 4 questions, you will have 2 minutes to respond. Now, I'd like to point out Mr. Don Bradway, back there by the pillar. He's got a sign. On one side it says 30 seconds, on the other side it says time. When he turns it to 30 seconds, I will go 30. You'll hear that and not disrupt your train of thought. Okay? When he shows time, if I think you're within a few words of finishing, I will be happy to let you try to finish your thought. If I think you're on a tangent, you're going to go for it, I'm just going to cut you off. And we will do it in a way that's hopefully mutually respectful. The additional questions will come from the audience, and you will have 1 minute to respond. Okay? And this is not designed to be a back and forth between candidates. Again, we want you to each focus on your own position and your own thoughts and ideas. And at the end, we will allow a minute for a closing statement. We are scheduled to be done by 3 o'clock, and we will be done by or prior to 3 o'clock. And those that can have the time in their schedules, we have the room open until 5 to kick us out. So hopefully you'll get to mingle and visit, and people will get some one-on-one time with the candidates. Let's see. Yes, it'd be time to ask if there's any questions from the candidates at this time. All ready? All right, then we will be ready to begin. Michael, since you're on this side closest to me, I'm going to start with you to start the first question. Because after I ask, I'm going to hand you the mic anyway. And some of these are some big questions, so I'm glad you guys have got some time to think about these first 4, because 2 minutes is hard to do justice.
Well, thank you. It's such an honor to be with all of you here today. All right, Don. Start my time over.
Let me test it. Maybe I wasn't holding it close enough to my mouth. Is that better? Yes. Is this closer? Okay.
Once again, thank you. It's such an honor. All right, for a 3rd time. There we go. Thank you. It's such an honor to be with you here today. Ever since I announced my intention to run last May, we've been determined not to skirt away from the hard issues, the hard federal issues. And one of those things that's very strongly is on my heart, let me ask all of you, would you all like to see Hillary Clinton go to prison? Me too. And if we go to Washington, we're going to work very hard to make that happen. Or what about this witch hunt against Donald Trump and his administration? Would you all like to see this investigation end and Robert Mueller be fired? No! Well, some people not, apparently. But whoever wins this race is going to have to take hard positions on difficult issues. Now, one that's very near and dear to my heart is the Federal Reserve. As most of you already know, I'm committed, publicly committed, to abolishing the Federal Reserve. And I'm hopeful that we can get all the other candidates in this race to join me. So let's ask them, in fact, will any of the other candidates on this stage make it your public position to abolish the Federal Reserve? Okay, Nick is with me. Now the rest of them, I find it very curious, because abolishing the Federal Reserve is actually in the Idaho GOP platform. So if you don't want to abolish the Fed, you're actually running against our party platform. Guys, we need to send a true conservative to Washington. The choice in this race is crystal clear. And guys, we need to get out on May 15th. We need to vote. And my opponents, they sure have some explaining to do.
So good afternoon, thank you. I just want to introduce myself to you, let you know a little bit about me. My name is Christy Perry, and I'm actually a Canyon County girl. I live south of Nampa, And I not only live in this district, though, that I did grow up there in the small town of Middleton. I come from good, hardworking Christian people who have never had a thing handed to them. And I'm a lot like you, where I've worked hard for everything that we have. I am the first person to ever graduate from college in my family, and I was 40 when I did it. And I set the example for my children as well. I have a bachelor's degree, a master's degree. I'm a precinct committeeman, and I'm a 4-term representative from the agricultural district of Canyon County. And now I'm asking to be your next Republican representative for Idaho's 1st Congressional District. You know, my husband and I, for nearly 20 years, have owned the Buckhorn Gun Shop. And so if after tonight it gets hard to remember everybody's name, just remember that I'm the girl that has all the guns. You want to go shooting, I'm game. And it's because I'm a small business owner, because we own a gun shop, we do know firsthand that the feds are constantly after us. They want our guns, our property, our rights. They want to control education and health care. And even as they are out of control, they have been demanding more from us. And we have had enough. So it's time, Idaho, that you have a very unique opportunity to send the person who has the talent, the knowledge, the ability, and the passion to defend you from the bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. So I'd like to ask for your support and your vote on May 15th, and may God bless all of you in the same way that He has blessed me. Thank you.
Hello. My name is Luke Malik, and I'm running for Congress. I'm running because I believe that the federal government is broken. It's not representing us. And we need members of Congress that are willing to fight for our future. We need members of Congress that are willing to collaborate, to listen to everyday people, and who are willing to actually come to solutions that make our lives better. That's exactly how I've conducted myself as a state legislator for the last 6 years. I've worked on things that have truly made me proud to represent this area we live in right here in northern Idaho. From working on the crisis centers that have helped us keep from incarcerating individuals who are suffering from mental illness, to working on education issues that have given our children a brighter future, to working on healthcare bills that we've passed through the legislature that have helped reduce the cost of healthcare and helped improve our lives and get more local control for healthcare here in Idaho, to holding as many town halls, more town halls than any other legislator in the Idaho legislature. That's one of the things I'm most proud of, is the accessibility that I have created in my term in office. I have many town halls right here in this very space. Many of you have come to, and you know that I will put the crowd between myself and the door and listen to everything that needs to be said to me. And that's exactly how I'll conduct myself while I'm in Congress. I have a passion for serving. It's a passion that I get from my family and from my faith. Thank you. Including my grandmother, who's up here in the audience today. Hi, Grandma. She has been a tremendous influence in me in understanding that democracy is not a spectator sport. We have to fight for what we believe in, and we have to, and that's exactly what I'm going to do in Congress. Her grandfather was a Marine and set an example of service that I'm proud to carry on in Congress if you send me there. So I'd appreciate your vote. I'm looking forward to a lot of excitement today, so thank you.
Thanks all. You're back on? There we go. Thanks all. I'm Dave Leroy. I enjoyed the chance to say hi to some old friends, meet some new ones. 117 years ago, my ancestors came from the panhandle of Idaho. My grandfather delivered freight with a brace of mules. My mom was the first grade school teacher when Lewiston had only one school. My dad was the jeweler and watch repairman on Main Street. My brothers and I graduated from Lewiston High School. I got a couple of degrees from the University of Idaho. I have done political activity in the distant past. I was a two-term prosecuting attorney. I was Attorney General of Idaho and abolished the insanity defense. I was Lieutenant Governor of Idaho, presiding over the state Senate, and acting Governor of Idaho for 254 days. I'll bet many of you voted for me in the 1986 governor's race against Cecil Andrus, where within 0.8%, I would have been governor, a switch of 1,800 votes. I ran a small federal agency, and I've, in the last 20 years, held the highest title in our land, citizen. But I'm coming back now at this critical time in our nation's history for two reasons. Number one, Donald Trump is a change agent. And if we put conservative legislation in front of him, he'll sign it. And it's the job of the Congress to get that congressional approval, the congressional design, and the congressional bills to his desk.
30.
Secondly, I'm running because the most important job in America in the next 6 years is going to be a member of Congress. Under the Constitution, Article 1, Section 7, all bills relating to revenue must start in the House of Representatives. And as we've seen eloquently in the last week, with a 60-hour interruption, whatever they're talking about in politics, they're talking about money. That's why I'm running.
Well, good afternoon, everybody, and I'm really excited to see so many people have taken the time out of their day to come down here and listen to what myself and the rest of the candidates here have to say. It's particularly refreshing to be home in Coeur d'Alene. This is where I was born, and it's been, I know that when I'm done here, I get to go back to my house. It's going to be nice not being in a hotel. So a little bit about me. Some of you know me through my family, my grandfather, Frank Henderson, and he was a great man. He mentored a lot of the people here on this stage, and he really did a lot of great work for the state of Idaho. I had the privilege of growing up with him, not only as a mentor, but as a permanent presence in my life, and that shaped me into the man I am today. Beyond that, I'm a combat veteran. I served in the United States Army, and I fought in Iraq in 2005 and 2006 as an infantryman with the 4th Infantry Division. After getting out of the Army, I pursued my dream of being an aviator and earned my commercial pilot's license. I've been working as a commercial pilot ever since, and still to this day am flying commercially every month. Just a few years ago, I became a small business owner for the second time over. The first time didn't work out. This new business is in drones and technology. It's looking forward to the future and automation and how we can make ourselves better and more competitive internationally in a world that is changing. This company works with mining and resource developers, not only here in Idaho, but around the world. Now, some of you might be wondering why I would be wanting to go and go join Congress, which is arguably one of the least liked organizations in the United States. I'm a young guy with a bright future and a strong career going for me right now, and as a citizen of both Idaho and the United States, I'm entirely fed up with how corrupt and how non-representative Congress has become and the federal government has become. And it is my intent as a citizen and as a servant to go there and as a soldier to fight that corruption. Thank you very much.
My name is Russ Fulcher, and I'm running for Congress. And I want to thank the regular Republicans for hosting today, for all of you for coming today, and Mr. Banducci for your moderation of the event today. My friends, I'm a husband, a father, a real estate broker, an international businessman, a former state senator, and a member of the Christian faith. I'm running for Congress because I want to see a right sizing of that balance of control between federal and state. More importantly, I want to see the transition of power go back to the people from government. I'm very blessed to have deep roots in this state, with my family being here prior to statehood. The first 20 years of my life were spent on a dairy farm. The next 20 was spent traveling around the world for Idaho technology companies. As an early employee of Micron Technology and then with Frico Electronics, I was blessed to have grown business in 47 countries and 50 states. This unique and varied background prepares me to be effective in Congress. I understand and I affiliate with the conservative heart and soul of Idaho. And I understand how other systems in other parts of the world work, or more importantly, do not work. The divinely inspired Constitution, the guidelines that we have laid out by our founders, really do work. Empowering the individual works, not empowering government. Today, we're all here for the same reasons. We want secure borders. We want market-driven, patient-centric healthcare solutions. We want lower tax regulations and burdens. We want lower or less control of our education system, not some one-size-fits-all federal mandate or Common Core type of deal. We're passionate about the protection of the unborn and the rights to bear arms. Friends, experience matters. I'll be your champion in Congress. I'll be a friend of the Trump agenda and have a record to prove it. Thank you.
Well done. Thank you for introducing yourselves to this audience. And now we'll start with question number 1. In your opinion, what is the biggest problem facing America today?
Thank you for that question. And I believe that some of the biggest problems facing our nation today are really twofold, and they are debt and the divisiveness that you see in this country. We have a national debt that is so far out of control that we have no idea how it's going to get paid for. Are you guys going to pay for it? Is my generation going to pay for it? Is our children's generation going to pay for it? We're worried about it. We have debt that is ruining our economy. You are not making any money in your savings accounts. You cannot earn any interest. Your children are struggling. You sit at home and wonder, are they going to be able to afford a house? Can they buy your farm when you can't run it anymore? What are our children going to do? And that debt is there in part because of the divisiveness in this country and in Congress. Liberals versus conservatives. It's Christians versus atheists. And we can't seem to come together on that. And until we solve our divisiveness problem, not only amongst ourselves, but amongst members of Congress, we will not be able to solve the debt.
Yes, sir. Please.
I think the biggest problem facing our country today is the lack of faith that people have in America moving forward. There is a severe lack in the faith that the government is actually listening to the people. And it's heartbreaking to watch a whole generation growing up believing and being told by the previous generations that the government is no longer working for the people. The government has been separated from the people and is working for itself. And I think that if I could change one thing about our country moving forward, it would be to convince every citizen that their engagement in our process moving forward will make a difference. In the last election that I ran, about 3,000 people voted, or 4,000 people voted in the election that mattered, and that is out of 44,000 people that live in our county. And so you look at the amount of people that are engaging in the process because they don't believe that the process will work for them or will listen to them anymore. And that is the #1 issue that we're facing moving forward. So we need people who are willing to go to Congress and who are willing to help re-engage people in the system and truly believe that government will listen to them, will listen to their concerns, and will create solutions that will improve their lives moving forward.
The biggest problem facing America today is the fact that Congress is not solving the biggest problems facing America today. We haven't passed a budget since 2003. And last week, we did another in a series of continuing resolutions to kick the can down the road. And what was the solution? We'll know again in 2 more weeks when we try to kick the can down the road. Healthcare is a perfectly good example. We have self-inflicted wounds called Obamacare, where 1/5 of our national economic worth is tied up in healthcare, and all we have done is create a self-inflicted wound by government action. The biggest problem in America today, the Congress can't solve any big problem in America today.
Well, I think the biggest problem that we're facing today is that we have a threat from within. When I took the oath of service, when I joined the Army, I swore to uphold and defend the Constitution from all enemies, foreign and domestic. And right now, our biggest threat is coming from inside. We have a Congress that is non-representative. They come to our towns and they campaign and they say all the things we want to hear, but they get to Washington, D.C., and they're beholden to their special interests and to big money donors. They've no longer been representing the people. So the biggest problem we have today right now is the swamp in Washington, D.C. And it's items like a balanced budget amendment, a term limits for Congress amendment, take the keys to the bank away from Congress and away from those donors, and gets our government honest again.
Sorry for futzing around up here, but that cord's tagging the sign, so forgive me. I think there's a number of things, but the first and I'd say foremost is we have strayed away from the principles that are in our Constitution. If you've heard about the annotated Constitution, that's about, I understand, about 155-page version of the Constitution that's got all these court precedents that kind of twists and turn the original language of the Constitution. And if you've heard me talk before, you've probably heard me say I don't have the disadvantage of being an attorney. And I'm not saying that all attorneys do that, but some clearly fall into that trap. To me, words still mean things. And I understand what the words of the Constitution say, and we need to adhere to that. I do agree that debt is a significant problem as well. We've overspent, and there's apathy that has come along with that. But I would close with this. We have one other issue, and that's right here with all of us, with our families. As families and citizens, we've strayed away from some of the biblical principles that I think have been laid out that were there for our benefit. And so Constitution and biblical principles, those are the types of things that I think that we need to re-adhere to. Those guidelines really work if we'll follow them.
It's got to be life. Since 1973, 60 million children have been killed in America's abortion mills, and none of these guys mentioned it. It's got to be life, and it's not acceptable anymore, and the federal government continues to fund Planned Parenthood to the tune of more than $500 million a year. So we've got to know whoever goes to Washington is going to end this. So this is my pledge to you. I'm telling you in advance how I'm going to vote. When I go to Washington, I will never, ever, ever, ever vote for any bill or law that contains any funding for Planned Parenthood whatsoever. If it's even a penny, it's an automatic no. And we got to get beyond politics, beyond this election, because it's the right thing to do. So I'm calling on every other candidate in this race to take the same pledge. So will anyone take this pledge today with me? Nick will. Thank you. Russ, thank you. Because we need everybody. And it's not acceptable. Anyone that will not take this pledge should not be going to Washington. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, the choice is clear, and we need to send a pro-life champion to Congress. Amen.
All right, we did well with that, which is essentially a single topic question. These next three are rather broad. So I want to remind you, you do have 2 minutes to answer before we go to the general questions. Reduce this to 1 minute. Now, this next one, Luke, you will be first. Republicans now control Congress, the Senate, and the White House. Yet Obamacare has not been repealed. Why is there such gridlock, and what role should the federal government play in our health care system?
Thank you, Todd, and that is a wonderful question. Why have we not repealed Obamacare? And the answer is we have too much gridlock in Washington, D.C. And Congress, particularly my party, the Republicans, need to lead on issues that are going to do 2 things on health care. First of all, it needs to give power back to the states, closer to the people. And second of all, it needs to reduce the cost of health care. And the 2 of those are related. If we give more power to states to control their own destinies, to allow physicians to do what they do best, which is provide health care to people that they're seeing, then we will be able to reduce the cost of health care. There's too much federal bureaucracy, there's too much federal oversight, there's too much going on with the federal government inside our exam rooms, and it's driving the cost of health care up. and we need to bring the cost of healthcare down. So that will be my focus. And I'm a healthcare lawyer. I've dealt with a lot of healthcare policy inside the Idaho legislature, and I have pushed for more local control, less federal regulation, and pushed to make our healthcare outcomes better by bringing that relationship with our physicians closer to home. So that is exactly what needs to happen, and we need to move past this gridlock and quite frankly, the grandstanding that's standing in the way of bringing our healthcare costs down.
When I spoke with the director of the Department of Insurance for an hour and a half the other day and asked him, how do we solve the healthcare crisis, bring prices down, and provide products that work? He said we need to return to the free market system. When I spoke to a healthcare company president here in Idaho and asked him, how do we solve this healthcare crisis? He said, we need to return to free market principles. And so indeed we do. I was worried in going into those two interviews, because I'm a fact-driven guy and like to know what I'm talking about, that it might take 2 years or 3 years to return to free market principles. But no, both of them said, because we've got actuaries working all the time, we could actually do that within 3 months, and the net result, as it played out, might be a reduction in cost for both medical services using transparency and healthcare insurance using the free market principles, of a reduction in 30 to 60% of our healthcare costs and our insurance costs. The answer, as it should be for many things in the Congress, is to return to free market principles.
Well, thankfully, the process of dismantling Obamacare has already started to begin with the repeal of the individual mandate, which came about as part of the new tax plan that we just passed in Congress in December. I think that was a brazenly unconstitutional component of Obamacare, and amongst other things that were a problem there. I think one of the things that needs mentioned is that the repeal and replacement process for Obamacare has run into so much trouble because of those same insider politicians that have been getting in the way. Your Senator Flakes and McCain's from Arizona, the rhinos, the Republicans in name only, who have stood as barricades and obstructionists to passing repeal legislation and getting those bills through. The problem with healthcare in America is that right now we are, in the world, when you look at the next 11 countries behind us, we are the #1 spending country in healthcare. You would think that that would get us something, but it doesn't. We're number 11 in quality of care, behind all of those other nations that are spending less. The answer to fixing healthcare is getting obstructionists out of the way so that we can repeal what was a terrible policy with the Obamacare health insurance plan, which bankrupted exchanges and caused premiums in some states like Arizona to skyrocket over 100%, caused many people to lose their health insurance. I was one of them that received a letter of cancellation when it passed. We need to get that out of the way. And then we need to focus on how we're spending our money, why it costs so much more in America to get health care, and how we bridge that gap between our spending and our quality of care. What are other countries doing that will enable us to do that? And I believe there are certain elements of collective bargaining and an all-pay sort of system that would allow us to bring the cost of health care down and make us make those dollars go even further.
Those of you who followed me in recent years, you know that I've been a champion for the free market in the healthcare system. So much so that it led to a gubernatorial challenge in 2014. So it is the free markets that is the patient-centric solution to this issue here. However, I want to just address the first part of the question. Congress hasn't repealed that because, quite frankly, I think there has been a lack of leadership. And there's a reflection there of Americans. A lot of people in America were split. Should it have been a repeal? Absolutely. The guts of it have been removed now with the mandates being removed. But once again, let me go back to constitutional guidelines. That's the guideline. And so the role of government there has to do with that constitutional role. It's 3 areas: life, liberty, and property. And that's where the role of government ends. An example of protecting life the government can engage in is abortion should be illegal. Euthanasia and the like, those types of things is an area where government is supposed to protect. Protecting liberty, you do that by protecting access. And I'm not talking about redistributing wealth so you pay for things. It's protecting access so that everyone can get access to the healthcare system. And if there are certain insurance programs, why isn't there alternative healthcare that's part of those insurance systems? So that's another one. Protecting property is another thing that the government can do, and that's just to ensure that private operators can own and operate their business. Everything else, it's in the private world. The states have a little bit more leverage because those powers can be pushed to the states. So we can address indigent care and that kind of thing a little bit more through faith-based systems and so on.
What role should the government play in managing our healthcare system? None. None. Period. Where is it in the Constitution? Honestly, guys, the more the government gets involved in the healthcare system, the worse our healthcare system gets and the more expensive it becomes. Now, I know there are some of you out there that remember the 1960s and the 1970s and what it was like back then. And you know what? The free market works if we'll just take the shackles off. So we need to get back to free market healthcare solutions. Now, for the first part of the question, why do we have so much gridlock in Washington? Well, it's because we've got way too many rhinos there already. And you guys probably already know one of my campaign slogans is, every rhino has got to go. We are sick and tired of compromising Republicans. We need people who are going to go to Washington who are going to support the president. And I am going to support the president. I'm 100% pro-Trump. I want to go to Washington and implement the Make America Great Again agenda. I'm fully committed to it. Not all of my opponents are. So we need to know who is going to stand with the president. Because you know what? The last thing we need is to send another rhino to Washington along with the rest of them. We are going to send a conservative to Washington. We're not going to put up with anything else. And we're going to make the distinctions in this race crystal clear. We need to force everyone in this race. And if you go to our website, if you go to michaelsmatter.forcongress.com, you look at our positions, you'll see we're being really specific. You'll see we're giving really specific solutions, really specific answers. Well, not everyone. Unfortunately, some people have chosen to be very vague because they don't want to tell you where they stand. They don't want to offend anyone. We're going to be straight talkers like Donald Trump. If you want a regular politician, hey, you're going to have some great choices in this race. If you want a straight talker like Donald Trump, vote for me.
Thank you so much. So it's a two-part question, right? Why do we have gridlock, and then what is government's role? And the reason you have the gridlock is that same reason. It's because you have this divisiveness. We stand up here, we keep attacking each other. You know, we're expected to slit our wrist and decide whose blood is redder than the next. When really what you need to decide is, if you're Republican, here is our framework. It is God, it's country, it's your freedom, it's your liberties, and we have to operate within that framework, and we need to stop being so divisive and pointing fingers at each other so that we can sit down and come up with plans. Obamacare is still in place because even though the Republican Party is in charge up there and have the power up there, they haven't been able to coalesce yet, and we have to do that. The federal government's role is to protect life. Federal government's role is to protect the unborn. I do have a 100% pro-life voting record. You can absolutely look that up. And we also do need to do those free market forces. This is what Idaho has looked to do, is to try to have the free market engaged. And the biggest problem that we're having with healthcare and the cost of it is all the regulations that are attached to it. So one of the biggest jobs is to go back there and start removing regulations so that the free market can actually work and act the way that it is supposed to operate. That's actually what we need to be doing. And government, in all things that it does, should be limited. But yet, I want you to keep in mind, should it be involved in healthcare, when it's to save the unborn, and when it is to help those disabled and who need help in that regard. Thank you.
goes like this. Ronald Reagan famously said, "Government's view of the economy can be summed up in a few short phrases. If it moves, tax it. If it keeps moving, regulate it. And if it stops moving, subsidize it." What policies would you support in Congress to benefit our nation's economy, and more specifically here in Idaho?
I like the reference to Ronald Reagan, and he was a perfect advocate as president that less is often more. As a young man, I got to be acquainted with Ronald Reagan, was a co-chairman of his re-election campaign here in Idaho, was honored to have his endorsement in the Oval Office when I ran for governor of Idaho. And the prescription that Reagan used when he was in office, short and simple as it was, is actually in play now. We've had tax cuts, and we have a Trump boom in anticipation of those tax cuts with $6 trillion of new equity created in the stock market. We have regulations being cut by executive order, but we need Congress to change the statutes to make sure that those regulations will not be implemented again. Trump promised to cut 2 regulations for every one that he adopted, and in fact, at his year-end report, he cut 22 regulations for each of those regulations that was adopted this last year during the Trump administration. So we're on the right track. If we can simply support this president in a Reagan-like way to cut regulations, to cut taxes, and to continue the things that limited government and personal responsibility can bring back to this nation. That's exactly what we should do, and that's exactly how we should do it. And it's particularly important here in this natural resource-based situation that we have in Idaho. Recently, the 2 largest taxpayers, the 2 largest landowners in Idaho got together at Boise State University. Sadly, they were the Secretary of Agriculture and the Secretary of the Interior. Let's go to work. Let's be more like Reagan. Let's support this president as he moves in that direction.
Well, first of all, I think it's important to say that we're seeing a great economic boom following right on the heels of this most recent tax plan that's been passed through. I think the next step in continuing that economic growth is going to be seen, it's going to be realized in these midterm elections, because we ran into a problem trying to pass this tax plan and making those tax breaks permanent for individuals. Congress was able to get that done for businesses, but because we didn't have the majority strong enough to make it permanent for individuals, they eventually time out. So I think the first step for making our economy stronger is getting a more powerful majority of conservative Republicans into Congress, who are then able to make those individual tax breaks for us permanent. So we're keeping more of that money in our pockets. That, for a small business owner like myself, means more money going into my business. More business means I start hiring again. It's just as plain as that. The very next thing I would do, I would say, for making the economy stronger is we've got a spending problem in Congress. Washington, D.C. will tax and spend all day long, and they don't even seem to see the numbers anymore. But I know that when you wake up in the morning and you see that debt clock, it gives you heart palpitations. It gives me problems. So I think that balanced budget amendment is the next step, where we make it the rule, the law of the land, that Congress has to pass a balanced budget. That will then bleed over into our economy, and the consumer confidence will increase, and with that, we will see a whole lot more of thriving businesses in our communities. Moving on from that, it's time to take the keys away from the special interests and all those donors who have bought and paid for politicians time and time again. I've paid for my entire campaign so far out of my own personal accounts. I haven't taken any donations yet. We need to take congressional offices and put term limits on them so that people cannot be bought and swayed by businesses and by special interests and political lobbies, so that we're then able to get conservative, principled politicians in place who are there as servants and that are then able to make our economy thrive. Thank you.
So the Reagan quote actually came from the mindset that somehow government is the solution, when, of course, we know that it's not, or at least that's my belief, that it's not. And so there's a number of things just in terms of policy that I would try to adhere to. I do think that it's really important to flatten out that code, flatten and simplify the code so that you can actually manage it. We've just seen a huge piece of evidence on how reducing the burden and minimizing regulation, what kind of an impact that has on an economy. There's this little company that I used to deal with as a startup when Micron Technology was a startup called Apple Computer. And when they got the word of the recent Trump tax reform, they announced they were going to put another $350 billion with a B back into American production. That's just as one example. But minimizing that burden works, simplifying it, flattening it. I would also suggest in some areas that we consider a structure to change that structure with a user fee or more of a consumption-based type of model, because that's more fair when it comes to certain things. When it comes to regulations, I'm going to go back to the Constitution again. You hear me say that a lot. If you're going to regulate something, and you're going to have the authority to do that, you can only do it when it comes to life, liberty, and property. So all these regulations need to be measured by that yardstick. Lastly, I am just not a fan of subsidies. It has a tendency to interrupt the free market system and penalize performance.
Between 1872 and 1913, there was no federal income tax, there was no central bank, and government regulation was just a fraction of what it is today. So was that a disaster? No, actually it was the greatest period of economic growth in all of U.S. history. And we can return to those days if we have the will to do so. Of course, it's not going to happen overnight, but let's talk about the income tax. I spent an entire year studying the income tax as I got my LLM in taxation. And at the end of that year, I came to the conclusion that the best thing we can do with the tax code is throw it in the shredder and get rid of it, because the tax code is over 2 million words long, the regulation's over 7 million words long, and so in total it's about 10 million words long. It's a complete abomination, and so there's no excuse for anyone suggesting that we should keep the current tax code. Like Ron Paul, I am proposing that we get rid of the federal income tax entirely. And so, ladies and gentlemen, there's huge differences, and there are huge differences between me and the other candidates and between the other candidates, and we need to look very closely. And there are organizations out there that look at us and that look at voting records in particular. And so, personally, I don't have a voting record that's worse than the Bernie Sanders-loving socialist that's running as a Democrat for governor, which unfortunately happens to be one of my opponents. We need someone that's a true conservative. We need someone that's going to say, go to Washington and say, let's get rid of the income tax. Let's get rid of the Federal Reserve. Let's limit the federal government. In fact, if we cut the size of the federal government in half, that would be a great start. So guys, I encourage all of you, get all of our literature, go to all of our websites, compare what we believe, get educated. Because an uneducated population is how we get the people we already have in Washington. It's time for a change. It's time for straight talkers. It's time for specifics. It's time for the truth. I encourage all of you to look at our campaign, michaelsnyderforcongress.com. There's a reason why our numbers are surging, and there's a reason why true conservatives all over the state are pouring into our campaign with each passing day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I grew up in the Cold War. I grew up when America was a superpower. Ronald Reagan was the greatest president of that time, and I absolutely loved him. And so I understood that, when Trump came out and said, let's make America great again, I was all in. Because I lived when America was the greatest, right? Just like many of you have. So the policies that we need to look at is we need to lower taxes, which we've just begun to start on. We need to have less regulation, and we need to put the sovereignty back into the states so that states can actually handle those things that they need to. So for example, education. For those of you who have children and grandchildren, your children are not only competing for jobs in Idaho, or just competing for jobs in this nation. They're competing for jobs globally. That's how they're going to have to operate. And so America, we've really got to be able to step up and do that. We've got to get rid of the regulations. I'll give you an example. If we want to start building small businesses, when my husband and I did that, we had to get an SBA loan. That was the rule. $15,000 in fees we had to pay to the federal government to be able to get an SBA loan before the bank would even talk to us. That's ridiculous. And that stifles small business growth, and that's what this nation needs. Small businesses represent 98% of the hiring across this nation. And the entrepreneurs that we have up and coming in our millennial generation, we've got to pave the way and let them really shine and start building our economy. We also need to take our university systems and align them with what businesses need now. So for example, I knew an accountant who came out, got her degree, and then when she went to work for somebody, she didn't know how to use the accounting software. She was taught theory. That's not going to work for us. We have got to change the way that we're doing things, put the sovereignty back into the states, and let them, let their children succeed. Thank you.
But Ronald Reagan was exactly right. Regulation, taxation, and subsidies are a problem, and they are hampering the economy. Someone once told me, everybody loves a story. They love a protagonist who's going someplace and then something that arises and stands in their way. And our job creators in America, right here in Idaho, are our protagonists, and they are taking us to a better future. And the things that stand in our way are things like regulations, like taxation, and like subsidies that make things unfair for everyone to compete in the market. So when we have something that happened, like President Trump's tax relief, now it wasn't a perfect bill, there was compromise that was had on that bill, but it's not perfect, but it moves us in the right direction. When we have something like that, a good compromise that moves us in a good direction, you see hope. You see hope among those protagonists, those business owners that are taking us to a better future, who are taking us to a better economy. So the best thing that we can do to create a better economy is get government out of the way of business owners, job creators who are taking us to a better future.
Thank you very much. This next question is going to seem a little bit like a follow-on question. And it occurs to me it might be appropriate for another Ronald Reagan quote. This is being sponsored by the Reagan Republicans. I may not get this exactly right, but if I recall he said something to the effect of, the most dangerous words you'll ever hear are, "Hi, I'm from the government, I'm here to help." Bearing that in mind, this is my own addition to the question, and what the enumerated powers are in the Constitution of the federal government, how would you define the proper role of the federal government? Nick, you're first.
Well, I am through and through a small government conservative, bordering on the side of libertarian, in that I don't want the federal government in my home, I don't want them in my gun safe, and I don't want them in my doctor's office. So for me, I believe that the federal government, as it stands now, is bloated. It is way too big. They've gotten out of hand, and they've stolen a lot of the power from the states that should rest with the states. So I believe that the federal government has its place in defending our nation and in protecting life and representing our interests abroad. And that's where it stops. I want the federal government out of Idaho. They currently own, I believe it's something like 61% of our land. That is unacceptable. We need to get that land back to Idaho. So my definition for the federal government is we need to cut it down 50%, 60%, 80%. I want it down. We're going to trim it down to size, and I'm going to treat that like a fire mission, and I'm going to get out there and I'm going to fight guns blazing to make the federal government go back to the small size it was meant to be when our founders wrote the Constitution.
So the question of the proper role of government is really not much. If you take a look at the constitutional authority of the federal government, remember, we live in a republic. And in that republic, there's just really two areas. And one is the ability to manage and administer laws that encourage personal liberty, and then provide for defense, national defense, and then more locally, public safety. That's really where it ends. From there, if you look at the 10th Amendment, those powers transition to the states. And if you recall my opening statement, one of the primary reasons that I'm doing this is because I realize that that pendulum of control needs to shift from the federal back to the state, more importantly, from the government to the people. So that's the proper role of government. I do want to follow up on what Nick said about the lands. A big part of that pendulum swing came in about that Civil War, post-Civil War era, when the government changed, the general government, federal government, changed its policy on lands. Eastern states came into the Union under the same constitution the Western states did, but for the most part, the Western states never kept their land. So that's a huge issue. I do believe that's going to change, but he who controls the resources control their destiny. And so that's a huge part of our policy moving forward.
I just want to applaud Nick and Russ for their stands on the lands. I'm with them 100%, and I applaud their stands very much. But as far as the proper role of government and defining it, well, I don't have to define it because it's already defined by the U.S. Constitution. And in the U.S. Constitution, there's a list of enumerated powers which tells us exactly what the federal government is supposed to be doing, and the federal government is not to go beyond that. Unfortunately, what have we got today? We've got an ultra-power federal government that wants to get involved in every area of our lives, and that's not acceptable. And today, it's like the 10th Amendment doesn't even exist, but the 10th Amendment says whatever powers are not specifically delegated to the federal government by the Constitution are for the states or for the people. So you guys know me. I'm not going to Washington to take a tour, to have a good time. I'm going to be a wrecking ball. I'm going to turn over the tables. My message when I go to Washington is this: hand over the keys and get out of Idaho. We're tired of you being on the backs of our small business owners. We're sick and tired of your regulations. We're sick and tired of your mandates. We want to change. We're demanding a change because we, the federal government today, our founding fathers never envisioned this kind of enormous, gigantic federal government. It's unacceptable. And once again, we need someone who's going to go and not just talk about it. We need someone that's going to fight. And what I believe, I didn't talk to a focus group. I didn't talk to national consultants. You guys know, everything that I believe has been plastered all over the internet for the last 7 years. Because I've been a writer. I've written more than 3,000 articles telling you guys exactly what I believe and where I stand. And so I'm with Nick. We're going to go there. Cutting the size of the federal government in half, that's just a good start. We can cut it 70, 80%. We're going to do that because this is our opportunity to take our government back. And we, the people, can do it. Trump showed us it. And now the next step for the Trump movement is send people like me to Washington to take Washington back.
Thank you. The proper role of government is limited. And it doesn't matter if it's the state level, the federal level, your local level, it's all limited. There hasn't been a single program ever that has not been expanded in some way or the other. But it's exactly right to sit here and quote the 10th Amendment because the power actually belongs to the states. And when we talk about a pendulum swing, that's where the swing happened. Back in 1835, Alexis de Tocqueville wrote the book Democracy in America. And what he said is, this is a great system, all the way up until Congress figures out how to bribe the people with their own money. And that is exactly what has happened. The federal government dangled this money that belongs to you. Right. It's not theirs, except for the stuff they're printing that they really shouldn't be printing, right? But that's what has happened. And so when we talk about the role of government, the states have got to take back their sovereignty. And that's how it was meant to be, and the states need to start standing up. But it's going to take the states to send a representative who goes back there and understands that, and is going to be able to preach that message back to Congress, because it's going to take a majority of our states to do that. But we should have the power. And the proper role of government is that it rests in your hands, and it rests in the state, and that we should be actually controlling our destinies. Thank you.
I don't talk much about the decision that caused me to go to law school, but I can tell you when I did, it was because I read the decision that had just come out at the time I was applying, DC versus Heller, which talked about the Second Amendment of the Constitution. And that decision does a really good job about laying out, as a lot of Supreme Court opinions do, about laying out the powers under the Constitution. It's been said up here by just about everybody, but the role of government, the proper role of government, is exactly defined by the United States Constitution. That's why it's definitely one of the most revered documents in our political history, or the most revered document in our political history in this country, but one of the most politically revered documents in the world, because it delineates the difference between powers that are given to the people versus what our Constitution does, which is said the power is reserved to the people. The people have chosen to give certain delineated powers to the government, and only those powers can it exercise. That's the beauty of our Constitution. And anything beyond that Constitution, power that's taken beyond that, is illegal power under the Constitution. So that role is very properly defined. The Constitution is what caused me to go to law school. Defending the Constitution, as I mentioned, there's conversations that I had many times around the dinner table, right, Grandma, about what our role is to defend what we have, is to make sure that we are defending our Constitution. And that is the proper role of government, defined in that document.
You've had a lecture in constitutional law up and down the table, and I'm glad that we all agreed upon that. And I'm also glad that President Obama is not our constitutional law teacher. In addition to the 10th Amendment, which has been eloquently explained by my worthy opponents, a couple other touchstones that I think are important. James Madison in the Federalist Papers, number 45, even before the Constitution was adopted, when it was being understood and contemplated by the colonists and advanced by the founders, said that the powers of the federal government under this new document are defined and are few. And in addition to a 10th Amendment, we've got a 9th Amendment, which specifically reserves and retains to the people an unknown list, an ever-expanding list of rights, and says that none of those mentioned in the Constitution to any level of government should impair the rights of the people. So as a congressman, I'll ask the threshold question on every piece of legislation. Consistent with the Federalist Papers, consistent with the Constitution, is this piece of legislation something the federal government should be doing in the first place? And the answer, if it's no, I'll tell you how I'm going to vote.
All right, everyone, we've completed the original 4 questions that were submitted to you for consideration. Now what I've done is glean through the questions that I've received from the audience, and try to select a representative group of questions as we move forward. The format will change slightly. We're down to 1 minute for the responses. A little bit narrower focus, I guess, on these. The one that jumps out at me right away, though, would be a little bit of a follow-up to the question that we just had. I never touched on the issue. And the question was about, are we going to fight to take back Idaho lands? But I'm going to adjust that question slightly, because I think that's a narrow view of the question. The question is, should we be fighting to take back federal lands, assuming they were ever Idaho lands in the first place, statehood, territory, that sort of thing, or should we really, what we want is management of those lands? Because I think there's a big debate whether we are more efficient in managing those lands locally for education and for the money that we can make off the timber and the natural resources. So I guess it's kind of a 2-part question. Is it us or the federal government that should control the land, own it, and who should manage it? And Russ, I think you can start.
This has been an issue that has been a big one for me for a long time. And as I mentioned in a previous response, whoever controls the resource base controls their destiny. And in the state of Idaho, it's actually a little bit worse than it sounds. 62% of those lands belong to the federal government, but it's actually a lot more restraining when you consider EPA regulations and endangered species and that kind of thing. Those resources need to be controlled here locally. Those who are the most tuned in to those needs are here. They're not in Washington, D.C., and we have incredible wealth here, folks. In some ways, we're starving to death in a room full of food, and those resources need to be transitioned here, and they will. The federal government is way, way, way overextended. They can't do this, and so those management needs to come here so we can protect our access and glean those resources.
Thank you, Russ. I'm 100% with Russ Fulcher on this issue. Idaho land should be controlled by the people of Idaho, period. And so when I go to Congress, I intend to introduce legislation that would ban the federal government from owning and controlling more than 10% of the land of any state. Because you know what? We do have tremendous wealth under our feet. They call us the gem state for a reason. We've got precious metals, we've got oil, we've got gas, and if we could access our natural resources, we would be one of the wealthiest states in the entire country. We would no longer have any problem funding education, doing the things that we need to do. So yes, we need control of our land, and if we do, our budget problems will be gone permanently. That's why when I go to Washington, I'm going to say it's no longer acceptable for you feds to be controlling more than 60% of our land. We want our land back, period, and I'm going to fight for that.
Thank you. I know this is a hot topic, and it's one of those that you really have to think about. So I believe that we should manage our lands. I believe we should have access to the resources. We should be able to mine them, get the timber out of them, have control over our waterways. I have absolutely no problem with that. I think that it's the natural resources that we need to depend on. We need to find better ways to be able to manage them. I'm tired of watching our state go up in flames. I have to tell you that. And then I was more irritated when California got caught on fire suddenly. That was a big issue, and nobody had paid attention to Idaho. So I believe in land management, I believe in having control of our resources, and I believe in using that to educate our children and move Idaho forward.
I appreciate the question, Todd, because it is a very serious question. Obviously, I am also sick of not being able to go outside the entire month of August because of all the smoke that's happening here. Our federal lands are being mismanaged. But there's a big difference between owning land and managing land. And I can tell you that on the management side, Idaho is a national model of a growing exercise in a demonstration project that is managing both federal land and state land together so that we can manage our lands better. We have never owned the land that the federal government owns in Idaho. And there's no cogent legal theory for moving forward from taking that land away from the federal government. Where we need to be focused is on solutions that will have an impact in the state of Idaho. We need to be working on things like what's called the Good Neighbor Authority, where we are working with the federal government to manage land that is currently being mismanaged because the federal government is doing it incorrectly. That's where we need to be focused. That's where we need somebody who understands Idaho lands in Congress to help expand that authority to the state.
I was Attorney General back in the 1970s and 1980s when we had something called the Sagebrush Rebellion, when we were very hopeful that some sort of analysis would allow us to be more successful in wresting away title or control of federal lands in the western states where disadvantages have been described. That did not play out, and what we now have is an opportunity to use the Trump administration to wrest management instead of title away. Not only do we have 1 million acres in this state under management, under the Good Neighbor Authority, but I believe that an effective congressman, like I could be, having been on the state land board, managing state lands, could propose new solutions. Just as we have wilderness areas with lines around them, so also should we have working forests with lines around them where we can plan, predict, and utilize the natural resources on a regular basis fed and state cooperatively.
I think everybody up here has really kind of given some great responses for this, and as someone who has to fly in the fire season, that smoke has kept me on the ground more than once, and it's a terrible thing that we have to deal with here in Idaho. You know, when back before the federal government started exerting all this authority over our lands and over our management policy, having a 1 million acre year of a fire was a bad year, and now it's not uncommon for us to see 7 million acres burned. That's what federal policy and federal management gets us, is bigger fires and more damage to our state. So I think when it comes down to managing our lands, we do need to wrest that authority back from the federal government. We need to take our lands and keep them for Idaho and manage them in Idaho.
I'd like to ask the panel a question, if I may. I'm trying to give you the cue at 30. Is that helping or is that hindering? I just don't want to disrupt your train of thought. Okay. If it's helpful, we'll continue to do it. One of the issues that's louder. Sorry. One of the issues that's very important to Idahoans, certainly here in the culture of North Idaho. I know myself, I'm an outdoorsman and love to hunt. We've had a couple references to our, I'm going to call it our gun culture. Both my boys have hunted with me, and I'm looking forward to taking my grandson out as soon as he gets a little older. And we've had some wonderful shared memories together. One of the questions is, with national reciprocity just being passed in the House, where do you see the Second Amendment? How are you going to continue to support it? Are you going to support us Idahoans in our right to have a magazine of 30 or 10 or whatever size we want, and a gun that can be whatever color we want or size or shape, and the proper definition of what actually an assault rifle is? Gentleman over there who's been in the service like I have, we know what we would call an assault rifle. Most people don't quite understand that concept. And you know, semi-automatic is not an assault rifle. So talk to me about the Second Amendment, if you would, please.
Thank you. You will find no stronger defender of the Second Amendment than me. So everyone up here is going to say they love the Second Amendment. But when I go to Congress, we need to start rolling back some of these federal laws. So when I go to Congress, I'm going to push to repeal every major gun law on the federal level. We do not need them. You have a constitutional right to own any type of gun that you please, and you have a constitutional right to carry that gun wherever you want, whenever you want, period. We're not going to put up with any restrictions on bump stocks. We're not going to put up with any gun laws. And in fact, I'm the candidate that's calling for the abolition of the BATFE. It's been harassing gun owners, harassing you guys for ages. We're going to abolish the BATFE. We're going to fully restore the Second Amendment. No limitations on the Second Amendment, ever, period, end of story.
Thank you. And yes, you're right. I don't think you're going to find a candidate up here who's going to say they're not for the Second Amendment. But not only do I support the Second Amendment, I understand it's a lifestyle. And that has been my lifestyle my entire life. But I think one thing we have to understand here is that I operate on those guiding principles of faith, family, and freedom, like all of you do. But you know what? It takes the firearms to back them all up, does it not? Right? So I'm 100% Second Amendment. I'm not going to vote. I don't want to even hear anything that has anything to do with another regulation on a gun. Ever.
As I mentioned, it was the D.C. Heller decision that finally convinced me to go to law school, that I wanted to be a defender of the Constitution. That case dealt with the Second Amendment. It was the case that struck down the illegal gun or ban on guns in Washington, D.C. in that physical area. And so I grew up around guns. Guns were a tool and have been a tool in my history, the history of my family for a long time. And I understand, as Representative Perry said, she's exactly right. There is no teeth in the rest of the Constitution if we don't have the ability to defend ourselves as individuals. There is no other government entity or other anything in the world that is meant to protect our individual liberties like we're meant to protect our own individual liberties, and the Second Amendment is critical to that. And so I'm absolutely a supporter of the Second Amendment, and like the others, I will not be voting for more gun regulation in Washington.
I had the opportunity yesterday to shake hands at the gun show in Post Falls. Before we went in, we drove the parking lot and saw, as you would expect, something near the state line, for about half Washington license plates and half Idaho license plates. And as I moved through the dealers, as I moved through the patrons, shaking hands and identifying myself, I found that the people fell into two categories. Those who lived here in Idaho or had come here to Idaho for the freedoms that we enjoy, including the use of firearms, or those from Oregon or Washington who wanted to move here because of the restrictions against it. The answer is make USA more like Idaho, defend those rights, and I'll do that faithfully, consistently.
Well, I think the four most important words of the Second Amendment come at the end. Shall not be infringed. So I believe that in any way the government has tried to impose gun laws on us, on we the people, those need to be repealed. The Concealed Carry Reciprocity Act was a great act. Unfortunately, it came as our Republicans, who had to kind of capitulate on the wording, paired it to an expansion of the national background check, making it harder for some of us to actually get guns. And so policy in Washington, D.C. needs to be reflecting those four words: shall not be infringed. National concealed carry reciprocity, absolutely. No bans on bump stocks, no bans on weapons, firearm types, no bans on magazine capacity, and most importantly of all, the rights of the American citizens to have and own guns and to possess firearms shall not be infringed.
Not all issues are created equal, and this is one of those just simply not negotiable for me. Second Amendment rights are just simply not negotiable. Those need to just stand, period. Never in history has that right been removed from a people where it's worked out well for the people. Okay? And I'm very pleased to have a track record championing with the Second Amendment Alliance, and also an NRA plus rating with the NRA. And so that track record remains in place. So I think we're in agreement on this one, but I'll just close by saying, never trust a government with a gun that won't trust you with one.
I think you all articulated it well for those of us here. Sounds like we're in agreement.
Yes, ma'am.
The next one's a bit of an interesting topic. Some of you know what I do in part of my other world. I'm interested in education at the higher level. But at the K through 12, we have this thing called Common Core that's being directed from the federal level. And it has created a very interesting situation here in Idaho. Tell me about your stance on Common Core.
Thank you. The problem with Common Core is that it emanates from the federal government. And again, they're trying to control your education from the top down. What works in Washington, D.C. does not work in Idaho. We need to see the innovation that Idaho actually produces, such as your STEM Charter Academy up here in North Idaho. That's what we need to be seeing. So I do not believe that the government should be regulating education in that way. I believe the state sovereignty, we can handle that ourselves. Thank you very much. But I do believe that we do need to up our standards, because our children, remember, are going to compete globally. So we just need to be tougher on ourselves. The STEM Charter Academy, again, is a great example, and the innovation that is going on around the state in different charter schools around the state is doing amazing things. In Idaho, this is what we can teach the nation, and I want to go back to Congress and really start leading America the Idaho way in these type of areas. Thank you.
like I said on the healthcare, like I said on the healthcare question, we have a serious problem when you come from the premise that you need the federal government in order to do anything successfully in your life. So when it comes to education, when it comes to healthcare, the federal government believes that it needs to be overseeing these things in order for it to be successful. And nothing is going to make you more successful than getting the government out of our lives, getting it out of your doctor-patient relationship, getting it out of the classroom, and letting professionals who know how to do what they're supposed to do and what they're trained to do their jobs. We don't need the federal government in the classroom.
As I mentioned to you, my mother was a first grade teacher for 40 years in Lewiston, Idaho. It was her interaction that educated all those children, not somebody from over the hill in Washington telling her how to do it or what to do it. She was able to individualize to those students exactly what they needed. And that's the key to an effective education system. Not only can we engineer that in the classroom, at the district level, and in innovative ways in the different 50 states, but we don't need a bureaucracy or a mandate from Washington to accomplish that purpose. In fact, those mandates and that bureaucracy gets in the way. If I had my preference, and I'll have a shot at it if you like me, I'll eliminate the Department of Education. Downgraded back where it used to be, an office inside Health and Human Services, which itself should be downgraded. Thanks.
Well, I'm in firm agreement with Dave on that one. And a couple months back, I actually posted on my website my plan for education reform in the United States, and it's centered on totally abolishing the United States Department of Education. I believe that the federal government is not any better at picking what your children learn than you, the parents, are. So that is something that we as a state and that you as parents with your children need to have control over. As the same way I don't want Californians telling me how much ammo I can have in a magazine, I don't want Washington, D.C. politicians telling you how to raise your children and what they can be taught. So when it comes to Common Core and bureaucratic decisions in education, absolutely not. The U.S. Department of Education needs to be repealed entirely.
So far, I think we're in agreement on that too. You get a double win because I think you save about $59 or $60 billion if you do that. So there's a double win by doing it. I oppose Common Core, and I've been on the front end of opposing that for some time. That was one of the great bait and switches that I was involved with back when this passed the legislature. I was there. I think it went through unanimously, and it was built as this role of this is somehow going to put the states in permanent autonomy over their education system. Absolutely, it was not. So anyway, to that end, I've been in opposition to that ever since. The bottom line is that there is no good one-size-fits-all education system. That's why the Department of Ed needs to go. The needs are different in Coeur d'Alene than Lewiston and Meridian, or for that matter, Detroit. The local control needs to be prevalent, and that's why school choice is so critical, and homeschooling is so critical. So localized education, one size fits all, does not work.
I very strongly believe that parents should have as many choices as possible in terms of education. So I believe in homeschooling. In fact, here today we've got homeschooling families that are supporters of ours that are in the audience today. Also believe in charter schools. I believe in private schools. I believe we need to improve public education. But this top-down federal mandate system that we have today has got to go. So I've been leading the way in calling for the abolition of the Department of Education. That's one thing I would do. I would immediately repeal, and I'm calling on everyone in the state legislature to immediately repeal Common Core. We've got to get that done, and in Boise and in all 50 states immediately. But I'll tell you what I would not have done. I would have not taken the individual that spearheaded the effort to bring and implement Common Core to Idaho, Tom Luna, and put him on my campaign team.
Well, Michael just hit my follow-on question kind of on the head. I've been trying to sift through this and was going to do this kind of as a two-parter. So Michael may have already kind of answered his part of it, because the other part of this is not only addressing the concept of Common Core and its implications in being instituted here in the state of Idaho, but school choice itself. And what that looks like as it's being directed from the federal level, how federal dollars are being distributed. The federal government, when they give money, as you all well know, have a lot of strings and rules. And one of the issues is why can't certain schools that may be affiliated with a religious entity share in some of the funds under certain circumstances. And sometimes a charter school may have some different rules. And homeschoolers sometimes can seem to be left out in the cold a little bit. So the question would be, what forms of alternative education do you support? Michael, you just kind of hit that one. And give us a thought on charter schools. I know Christine touched on that. Private schools. You know, I guess I'll call them religious schools, Christian schools, homeschooling. So just a quick follow-on, 15 to 30 seconds on your thoughts on the different choices of school and how that looks as it's being directed from the federal level and as the states have to follow those rules. Is the question making sense? Okay. You want to start again? Are you comfortable with that, Kristen?
Oh, nice.
Well, just stay right on theme.
Oh, it is on.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. That was a good play, wasn't it? But I'll take it. It's all right, I'm brave. You know, I'm completely in alignment with school choice. The district that I represent was one of the first districts to actually start the charter school model. But I think what we're running into trouble with when we look at how different things are actually paid for is the fact that we have this huge separation between Christians and atheists in this country. And the Christians have been kind of kicked out of the way. And the funding, that's why they don't want to fund religious schools. That's why some homeschools gets left out, charter schools, those types of things. That has really affected our funding. But I believe here again we go back to state sovereignty, and the states have the right and the ability then to make the rules in education the way that they would like them. Idaho is extremely supportive, and myself, you can look at my voting record. Homeschoolers, I have one of the largest districts for homeschoolers, completely supportive. Charter schools, private schools are also there, and Idaho, again, this is where we really shine, because regardless of what anybody else has imposed on us, we have been innovative and creative and found fabulous ways that we can educate our children, and we are doing a phenomenal job of it.
It's strange to be having this conversation in a federal debate, because in my mind, I have firmly attached education as a state issue. State education is a state-funded thing here in Idaho, and when it comes to, it's a constitutional duty actually in the Idaho Constitution that we fund education. Now, I was homeschooled, so I am all for school choice, and I went to parochial school as well. So these are things that help educate me and grow me in the way that I have with my family, and I'm very proud of my educational background, and I would never want to deprive any family of that. I think the question really boils down to is, should federal or state funding be going to some of these efforts? And the reality is it's a common education, and I believe we need innovation in common education like we have in our charter school. But I do not believe that we should forsake our duty to public schools here in the state of Idaho. Again, a state issue, I know, but we really should be focused on educating everybody and making sure that we have opportunities for parents to educate their children as they see best fit.
I'm a product of the Idaho public school system, but there's no reason that our public schools can't peacefully coexist and collaborate with, be simpatico with all kinds of school choices, and that's exactly what parents should have the right to do. When I was Attorney General, there was an effort made to discourage homeschooling. There was an effort made to discourage alternative schooling and force people into the public school system. I resisted that, and I resisted it vigorously, and that's one reason that we have the wide array of choices that we have today. I'd do it again, and I will do it again if asked so.
I come from a mining family, and with that came a lot of moves from place to place. So I've been in the Idaho public school system, I've been in private school, charter school, and I've been homeschooled. I think that speaks a lot about how I feel about school choice, and I think I turned out pretty well for it. I would support any form of school choice, and I think that it's important that we as a state protect homeschooling, charter schools. STEM Academy is a great example of where having that school choice really benefits the parents. And that's what it comes down to, is it's not so much school choice as it needs to be about parents' choice.
So we're running for a congressional office. This is a state issue, and but I was a state legislator, and so I got to take on. I too am a champion of school choice, so much so that in 2009 I was primary sponsor of the Senate for the homeschooling statute. So that's one of the things I feel most about. I want to mention one other thing that I championed, and that's the credit system, which I think is a solution to this, where parents should have a tax credit where they can choose where those dollars go to educate their kids. Important to make a distinction between that and a voucher, because if you use a voucher system, the government takes your money, and when they redistribute it, that gives them the legal clause to regulate and oversee something like homeschooling or private religious school or whatever. If it's a tax credit, then the government never takes your money in the first place, so they don't have that oversight. So no tax credits on this one.
Our new Education Secretary, Betsy DeVos, is a champion of school choice. I stand with her. I think she's doing a great job. And one thing that is very much on my heart is homeschooling, because my sister homeschooled all her kids. Me and my wife are going to homeschool our kids. My campaign manager, he was homeschooled. Their family are homeschoolers. So we need to protect the rights of homeschoolers, because that's very, very important. Because what we've got today, I call our public schools liberal indoctrination centers. We need to change public education from the ground up. And the federal government, they want to give us money, but they want strings. We need to end every string. We need to rethink how we do school. All right, thank you very much.
I hopped on that soapbox. And I do appreciate your indulgence. It is a bit of a state question, but I think there is overlap at the federal level because of the way, I think Mr. Folger touched on it, how depending on the taxability and the money and the strings, it's interesting the different ties of education. So until we abolish that organization at the federal level, we're always going to be a little bit under their authority and jurisdiction, and they're always going to have some control of that money. You won't have any more state questions. I tried to glean those out so we can stay at the federal level. There were several, trust me. Earlier was mentioned seeing license plates from other states. Washington and Oregon, I think, got mentioned. A couple of our more liberal neighbors, if you will. And it just so happens they happen to champion the concept of sanctuary cities. And that concept is being addressed at the federal level. And the current administration is dealing with that as we speak. I've been asked to solicit your position on sanctuary cities.
I was joking, so I was going to make Representative Perry go first again. So, I am a believer in the rule of law. And I think that's been a concept that has been, that has been reiterated by every candidate up here all across the board. The Constitution lays out the powers that belong to the federal government. And when it comes to federal immigration policy, the federal government is the entity that has the power. I apologize for my voice. Is the entity that has the power. The Constitution has given the federal government authority over immigration. So any entity that is trying to flout the power given to the federal government and create a situation where that Constitution is being violated, that is against what I believe in. So when it comes to sanctuary cities, if it's in violation of the Constitution, I'm absolutely against it.
On December 29th, I spent 6 hours on the Mexican border with the sheriff of Valverde County, bouncing along in his rig, walking the wall, looking at the desert, marching along the Rio Grande. We heard from him, we talked to the Border Patrol, and the only way that the enforcement of our borders works is collaboration between the federal government and the state government. There's no place in that mix in a safe America for sanctuary cities or sanctuary states. They must be brought to bear in terms of respecting the federal law, in terms of helping us realize and understand that in terms of crime in this state, drugs in this state, their border is our border, and we must have joint enforcement.
When it comes to sanctuary cities and in a broader picture, the immigration policy of the United States, I say America first and Americans first. What these sanctuary states and governors and mayors have been doing is they've created a culture where it's okay now to suddenly obstruct justice and put American lives at risk. We're not talking about harmless 5-year-olds that are being picked up by ICE because of sanctuary or no sanctuary city policies. We're talking about state officials blocking federal officials from prosecuting dangerous criminals. And I will not stand for any policy that puts American people and our American lives here at risk.
I'm actually embroiled with a debate with the mayor of Boise on this right now, because he supports sanctuary cities. But as mentioned, and I do not, by the way, but as he has mentioned before, one of the things that is a proper role of government, for the federal government, is for the protection and enforcement of those borders. And the sanctuary city flaunts that. It's absolutely incorrect. I do not support that, and we'll continue to fight against it.
I'm 100% against sanctuary cities, and you know what we need to do? The local officials, the local politicians that are designating their areas sanctuary cities, we need to start putting them in prison, period. Does anyone out there want to build the wall? Okay? We need to build the wall, and anyone that does not support Donald Trump on immigration and his policy in this area should not be running for Congress, period.
Thank you. In regards to this, I want you to know the Constitution certainly says that we have the right to protect our borders, and we certainly do. And we have been doing a terrible job. If you remember, the previous administration actually ran the Fast and Furious campaign, and the practical implications of that was basically that they were arming the drug cartels against our own people. So we've got that big issue that has to deal with, and we never should have been in an issue like that whatsoever. So now we have states that are basically nullifying federal law and saying, well, we're just going to let them come here. No, we're not. We're not going to allow that. We're not going to have it. And I think what we're going to need to do is any of those states, as far as I'm concerned, remember, they're getting federal subsidies. That needs to stop, because I don't want a single one of our tax dollars going to a state that is actually having a sanctuary city or a sanctuary state.
Well, Mrs. Perry was too polite to mention Fast and Furious. She was afraid everybody would go, ah, too many bad memories. And Michael got into my notes again. Who's behind my shoulder? I'm going to have to start watching these kids. I can't. And Luke, everything comes around, because you get to go first again. Because there's a quick follow-on to this question, because the question was, support the wall, yes, no, and if you have a 10-second reason why.
Support
the wall, sir. The wall. Build the wall, no build the wall.
I support securing our borders absolutely. I support securing our borders absolutely. Whether a brick wall is the best way to do that, I don't know. I'm not it, but I do support absolutely securing our borders. And more than so, I support creating good immigration policy moving forward that is fair, just, and protects us as a nation.
So in other words, no.
If I may direct you to a brochure that I hope you've all seen. It says, secure the border, build the wall, and enforce the law. That wall can be a combination of additional personnel, additional electronic detection, and additional physical structures. But if I may repeat, secure the border, build the wall, enforce the law.
I, for one, absolutely believe in support in securing the border using a physical wall, a combination of a physical wall, manpower, and technology. I know for a fact from my military service that there are insurgents around the world. We're not just talking about illegal immigrants coming here to work under the counter. We're talking about terrorist organizations across the planet who want to come here, infiltrate our cities, and hurt our people. Without a secure border, we are susceptible to that risk, and it is unacceptable that the federal government has allowed us to be exposed in such a dangerous and reckless manner so far.
In the spirit of not being redundant, the answer is yes.
Yes, sir. Okay. Build the wall, build it tall, build it strong. We're going to make everyone come in through the front door. We're going to support Donald Trump 100%.
You know, you'd think you'd turn to the right instead of to the left every time you run.
We just keep looking at each other.
Just makes me wonder. Hey. But when it comes to building the wall, I'm going to tell you that I'm tired of always hearing that our border agents are being killed over there. So if it takes an actual wall, then I'm all for it. I was talking to some people the other day in the district, and they said, well, what do you think? And I said, well, here's what I would do. If I get in trouble for this, I'm saying it. But I'd build a wall, and then I'd extend it around California. And then I'd trigger the fault line.
And remember, she owns a lot of guns. There goes one of Michael's kids again. One of the things I didn't want to do today was to put anybody in an unlevel playing field, because some of you have held elective office previously, and some of you have not. And so I didn't want to have to say, well, what offices have you held, or how many times have you run for election, or what was your rating from the Idaho Freedom Foundation or from the NRA, because some of you have not been in a position to be rated, and I didn't want that to be a gotcha question in any circumstance. But one thing that I do think is valid is, what has your personal participation been in the legislative process, in the electoral process, and just government? And one of the questions that came up was, have you been a registered Republican, and for how long, and how many votes have you cast? How often have you voted? Have you been an active participant?
I like that question because, as you recall in my opening remarks, I referred to the highest office in the land, citizen. I want to tell you, as a newly minted fellow, I cast my first vote in the presidential election for Richard Nixon. I've been a Republican partisan ever since, been registered in Idaho as long as Republicans can register. But I want to tell you that it's not just being registered. It's not just having been a constitutional officer or a county prosecutor. I also ran a federal agency, and I regard that as a significant experience for someone who would purport to be in Congress and help manage the federal budget. In the last year, I was United States nuclear waste negotiator. I turned back 34% of the budget monies that Congress appropriated to me because I wanted the taxpayers to have the money back.
When I turned 18 years old, not only did I register for the Selective Service, I also registered to vote. Fortunately, I was never called upon by Selective Service to serve. I elected and volunteered to go serve with the United States Army. My first vote wasn't so far back as Nixon was. The first president I could vote for was George W. Bush. Since that time, though, since registering to vote back then, I have participated in every election since, and I believe that all of my votes have been counted except for maybe the absentee ballot I sent in from Iraq. My participation in the political process, of course, I was raised around it with Frank Henderson, my grandfather, so I was exposed at an early age to what the political process is. When I got out of the Army, I worked as a special advisor to a joint caucus on Veterans Affairs for Senator Huggins and a Representative Thomas in Alaska, and I advised them on veteran policy as well up there. So that's been my contribution to the political process, and yeah, George W. Bush.
We live in a republic, and a republic has a couple of prerequisites if it's going to survive. One is that the people have to be educated, the other is that people have to be engaged. And so with that, I have been a Republican as long as I can remember, because that's the only thing my mama would let me be. And I have been involved with campaigning or helping someone campaign since high school. I've voted in every single election since I was 18 years old.
Thank you, Ronald Reagan was my childhood hero. That got me into, thank you. And ever since that day, I've never voted for anyone that wasn't a Republican, and I proudly voted for President Donald Trump in the last election, and with no reservations whatsoever. But let me talk a little bit about experience, because there's a lot of talk about that. If we are voting for someone just based on experience, well, Hillary Clinton would be president today. We need the right kind of experience. And over the last 7 years, through my writing, through my work on radio and television, through my traveling around this nation, I've touched more people for conservative and Christian causes over the last 7 years than everybody on this stage combined. So if you want someone that's been fighting for conservative values, Republican values, check me out, learn more about me if you're not familiar, because I am a Republican champion for conservative values.
He's still going left. Thank you. I'm actually a late bloomer when it comes to politics, and so I didn't necessarily grow up in a family that really put any interest in it, which is really unfortunate. But I learned after raising children and getting into businesses and doing those types of things how incredibly, incredibly important it was. So as long as I can remember, I have been voting. But I've also been involved in politics before I ever even got into the legislature. And one of the biggest things that I got involved in is the Save the Lake campaign in Canyon County. And you guys should go and look that up. And what happened was the federal government tried to come in and take our land and take our water and bought them back. I organized the Save the Lake campaign. We got national attention. We put so much pressure on them that they had to back out on everything that they had decided. So everything they wanted to take away, we got back. And that's really what you need, is that person who knows how to fight.
Well, as I said, we fought about politics and religion around the dinner table quite a bit when I was growing up, and so I was interested in politics and engaged in politics from before the time I could vote, and I do have my family to thank for that. And so I did register when I turned 18. I voted Republican my entire life, and beyond that, I really have felt it has been my duty to serve my country as best as I can, and that's the example that, like I said, my grandmother set for me, my grandfather set for me. I've got two brothers that are currently serving overseas. I thank Nick and every veteran for their service to our country, but this is my way of giving back. I think that's why we're all up here, is because we want to give back to the process and want to make the future brighter, just like those who have served in the military and those who built this process ever since the federal government. So. I am proud to be a Republican, and I will be a Republican my entire life.
Well, a small editorial from me on that. As a military member who went in during Reagan's administration, went in 81 in active duty. So I split the first two gentlemen that spoke, Mr. Leroy and Mr. Henderson, and about the same time Mr. Snyder was referencing, and mailed in absentee ballots from all over while I was serving. Hopefully they all got there, mostly, I think. So I appreciate it. And I guess this is to everybody out there. If you've heard about participation of the citizenry, vote. Don't complain. Vote. Be active. If you don't vote, you're not taking advantage of all the blood that's been shed to have that right. So I'll leave it at that. Folks, this is your last question, and then you'll have closing statements. This is a two-parter. What do you hope to be able to do, being one of 435 in the House, to bring industry and better paying jobs to Idaho? And along that line, do you have a specific opinion or position on NAFTA?
Well, I believe that in order to bring industry and business to North Idaho, that would require, and does require, a strong federal and state mutual relationship, where in the House, you're creating a tax structure that encourages small business owners to start those businesses and to actually register those companies and hire people and grow. In terms of creating policy at the federal level, then, you're looking to work in a way that creates opportunity for state legislators who are here working to make the state an attractive one for businesses to move into. And I think that's where you see the state representatives really coming to work, because they have the task ahead of them to make this state as attractive as possible to other businesses. In terms of NAFTA, I believe that our international, and I know I saw the card for the time come up, but I believe in terms of NAFTA, it's very important for us to have a very strong trading policy internationally, but NAFTA is lopsided and it doesn't put America first, and I believe that when any deal is struck overseas, it needs to be America first.
Fortunately, I had an opportunity in the Idaho State Legislature to be one of a larger number. And over the course of time, relatively short order, through just credibility and respect and education and knowledge and just diligence, then my colleagues put me in leadership role 6 of the 10 years I was there. And I think that I've got a skill set that maybe the good Lord's given me to where I can hopefully do that in the setting in Washington, D.C. as well. In terms of NAFTA, folks, I'm a free trade, free market kind of guy. And this is a lopsided deal on America right now, and so that needs to be opened up, and I do support the Trump agenda on that.
I am 100% against NAFTA and these other globalist trade agreements. We need to end them. We do need to trade with the rest of the world, but we need trade agreements that make sense. I stand with President Trump 100%. As far as economics, you guys know I've been writing about this for the last 7 years, more than all these guys combined. I hope we have a debate about economics sometime, because we're going to slaughter these guys. But we need to abolish the income tax. We need to reduce regulations. We need to implement the Trump agenda, because we're going to bring prosperity back to America, but we've got to work with Donald Trump. And so we need to go to Washington, work with Donald Trump. Yeah, I'll be one of 435, but we're promoting literally dozens of like-minded pro-Trump candidates around the nation. You can go to our Facebook page where we have them listed, and we want to get them elected all around the country. So we have a team when we go to Washington. Same thing with Boise. We're getting Liberty legislatures to Boise. We're working with 7 different candidates, because we're going to change Boise, and we're going to change Washington.
You want my mic?
Gotta do what you gotta do, don't you? All right. So in regards to NAFTA, it's not just NAFTA. It's trade agreements all over the globe that the previous administration has just hung us out to dry on. So we have got to go back in and renegotiate those, and as far as I'm concerned, Donald Trump is the man to do it. I am completely in support of what he is doing. Those trade policies which we have globally have to really prioritize our needs, and I think that most of us are aware of that. I think the other issue here, though, is that if you are one of 435, you cannot unilaterally do something, right? Otherwise you'd be a dictator. But you have the ability, and I have the ability, to bring people together, and really part of our problem is this urban versus rural divide. And up here, in Idaho, where we're a rural state, that has really got to be the topic of discussion, because we need to quit sending everything to the great state of Ada and some of these other countries, right? Okay, and some of these other states. And we've really got to start having that conversation about also how do we make our rural areas just as productive and prosperous.
Well, just like most things in life, the secret to getting things done is to listening to what the problem is. And that's something that I've built my career on in the legislature and my career in the private sector as well, is listening to what the problem is and crafting solutions. So when it comes to being one of 435, like I said, we are on a journey right now as a country, and the protagonists in our journey are the people, and particularly job creators, and we need to do whatever we can to get the obstacles out of the way of our job creators so that we can move towards a better future. So I will listen to job creators, and I will work with them to make sure that we have the best policy in place, and that folds right into NAFTA. NAFTA has its problems, absolutely. And I am all for doing away with bad trade agreements, but we had better have something better on the back end before we get rid of NAFTA, because I can tell you, I've been listening to industries, our job creators here in the state of Idaho, and we've talked about our agricultural industry and our timber industry, our manufacturing industries. They need good trade agreements so that we don't collapse those industries that we're depending on here in the state of Idaho. So yes, I'd be willing to get rid of NAFTA if we have a good trade agreement on the back end.
There's no saying, lead, follow, or get out of the way. As to lead, there are certain things that the United States government can do, must do, and should do, such as promote international trade. The next congressman from Idaho needs to engage with the White House and with the Office of Trade Representative to make sure that our Idaho interest, timber, agriculture across the board, where we build up so much of our economy as to trade, are properly represented and fairly renegotiated. Secondly, the follow. We need to follow the Trump agenda in terms of making sure lower taxes, less regulation, help us bloom and get out of the way. Idaho is the fastest growing state in the nation. Idaho is one of the most economically successful states in the nation. If they just get out of our way, we could do it even better.
All right, that does it for the questions. We'll give them a moment and prepare for their closing statement. I'll remind you each have 1 minute for your closing statement. Mr. Fulcher, you will go first with the closing statement. Just a quick part. I want to remind everybody there are a lot of materials in the back. The candidates have brought their materials, so please feel free to get their literature and to speak with them after the event is over. There's even a little bit on the local community college back there on one of the tables if you're interested, on the sidebar. All right, are we ready? Russ, please.
There is a reason that I've been endorsed by Congressman Raul Labrador, whose seat that I am seeking. There is a reason that the Club for Growth, Freedom Works, the United States House Freedom Caucus leadership have endorsed me. They have vetted all of us, and I got the endorsement of each one. Basically every major conservative stakeholder that gets involved with these things is endorsed me. With me, you know what you get. First, you get a Republican. I agree with the platform. The co-author and primary sponsor for the largest tax cut in the history of Idaho, the spearhead in opposition of Obamacare in Idaho, champion for a Second Amendment in NRA, homeschooler statute author, the award recipient for Idaho Chooses Life, Americans United for Life, Stanton Healthcare, Generation Life, and the real estate broker who brokered the deals to put life-affirming clinics immediately adjacent to 2 Planned Parenthood facilities. Folks, I believe it, I live it, I'm asking you to hire me, and I will not let you down.
Well, I like that theme. There's a reason why today Trump supporters from all over North Idaho are sitting in these first 2 rows supporting our campaign. There's a reason why a member of Trump's national campaign team has come to help run our campaign. There's a reason why our numbers are surging and the other guys it's not happening. There's a reason why people, Trump supporters all over the district, from Boundary County to Wylie County, are coming into our campaign. Now tonight, we haven't heard much about Trump from the other guys, but we're the 100% Trump campaign. We stand with President Trump. We're going to Washington to help President Trump implement the Make America Great Again agenda. If you're not familiar with us yet, get familiar, because we're going to win. And it's time for conservatives to coalesce around a single winning conservative campaign. We're that campaign. We're going to go to Washington, put Hillary in prison, restore the rule of law, and implement true conservative values. Thank you.
Still didn't get it. Last time and he still didn't get it.
You should buy her lunch.
I just want to thank all of you for coming. I want you to know what an honor and a privilege it is to stand up here in front of you and give you the opportunity to decide who you think is best. There's going to be a lot of good candidates in this race, but there's only going to be one best candidate, and that's the one that you're going to go ahead and vote for. I want to tell you that I've never been part of the Good Old Boys Club. I'm sure you can kind of tell that by my standing up here. And I also want you to know, it's not about me. It's not what's in the best interest of the politician. It is always what is in the best interest of you, the citizens of Idaho. And I'm going to ask you to do one thing before I'm finished. I don't want the focus to be on me. I would like to ask those of you in the audience, if you are a veteran, would you please stand, because we want to take our time and thank you for your service.
My name is Luke Malik, and I'm running for Congress because I want to fight for the future of Idaho. That's what I've done in the legislature, and that's what I will continue to do throughout this campaign and throughout my tenure in the United States Congress. I come from a family of service who truly believes that fighting for what we believe in is our most essential duty as American citizens. And I want to point out a couple people besides my wife, besides my grandmother. My wife is here. She is a federal prosecutor, and she fights every day in the courtroom against gang members in Canyon County. And so I can't reiterate enough how much service means to me and my family, and I have developed a reputation in the legislature as fighting for solutions, not just fighting for the sake of fighting, but listening to the people and fighting for solutions that make our life better. I want to thank the Reagan Republicans for hosting us today. I want to thank all of you for taking your time out today, and please, when you go to the polls on May 15th, remember my name, Luke Malik. I'd be happy to serve. Thank you.
My thanks also to all of you for being here and being engaged in this process. You are indeed the citizens that I have been and will become. The House of Representatives is the people's house. It's the only electoral body at the national level where you can change the entire membership in a single cycle. This open seat is Idaho's ticket to play, and the choice that you make as to who can be most effective in representing you is a critical choice for you and a critical choice for the nation. That family I grew up in Lewiston was the family of Lewiston Democrats. And in high school, analyzing the party's platforms of both parties, I chose to be a Republican. I am, have been, and remain a constitutional conservative. And if you would serve the Constitution, if you would ask this government to comply with the Constitution, I ask for your vote to go to the people's house to do the job for you. Thank you.
Congress was never meant to be a career. It's meant to be a hardship and a duty and a civil service. It's supposed to be a sacrifice. You're supposed to leave your families and your farms and your shops when the Constitution was drafted and travel to the nation's capital because it was your duty and your patriotic passion that compelled you to serve. The Army taught us many things, and one of those values they instilled was the value of selfless service. I'm standing in front of you now not as a career politician and not as someone who aspires to be a career politician, but as a servant. I served in the United States military because I absolutely love this country, and I believe that it needs to defend it against its enemies. And I stand before you today asking for you to vote for me to serve in Congress as your servant, because I know that we have enemies inside now that need fighting as well, and I want to lead that fire mission.
I personally would like to thank the 6 candidates for the fine job they've done this afternoon. It's my pleasure to introduce Doug Chevalier, the president of the local Reagan Republicans, who'd like to speak for a moment.
Yes, the one thing I'm happy about, the library lady came down and said, we're in violation of the fire code. Can't go to the fire department, I'm happy for it. Again, thank you so much for coming, I really appreciate it. The Reagan Republicans, there's a bunch of us out here. So thank you for coming, and also for candidates, thank you so much for all 6 coming. That means a great deal, and I really appreciate it, and I think you guys did too. Thank you so much.
Yeah, he's doing better. Well, I'm going to give you guys your basket back.
May I interview you? I'm with Redoubt News.
With who?
Hold on, I got a card.
Redoubt News.
Yeah.
What's your name?
My name is Sherry DeValle.
I'm Scott Herndon.
Hello, Scott. How are you?
He's the professional interviewer, so.
Yeah.
Professional interviewer.
Well, I thought you might be here. I saw your sign out front.
Okay, yeah.
How are you, Scott?
Pretty good. Nice to meet you.
It's good meeting you. You had some great comments during the forum up here, and I was going to ask you if it turned out the way you expected it to.
Yeah.
Did you?
Oh, yeah.
Are you still set on whoever your candidate is?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, people rehearse what the Idaho people want, and they memorize the wants and needs of the people. And most of these people give lip service, and then once they get to Congress, they'll do whatever their funders have instructed them to do. So, you know, obviously our country's broken. If you want more of what we've had in the past, then get a career politician. You know, there's a reason that people are endorsing certain established politicians, but there's a reason some of those established people will reject and downsize and downplay the other candidates. Yeah, so it's what I expected. At least I saw a little more potential in a few of the other, actually one of the other candidates, but as far as...
Have you made a decision yet?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely. So,
I think most people probably have. They're just kind of validating their decision. What do you think?
you know, I think people think they know what they want, but as their paradigms are becoming apparently false, then they realize that maybe a person that may not look like your picture-perfect wordsmith politician may not be the right choice. And I think this is the political environment we're in now. People are realizing that they have to admit that they're wrong, and they have to make a different choice. Because if you keep doing the same thing over and over again, you're going to get the same result.
Awesome points. Very good. Thank you. Scott, what about you? Did it turn out the way you expected it to?
As far as this forum here, this candidate forum, I would say it's about what I expected. I would say for people who haven't made a decision, it's an opportunity to get a little bit of a taste of the candidates, but I don't think anybody would ever be able to make a decision based on what they see here.
Yeah,
what they need to do is do their due diligence. I think the candidates that provide the best access, especially online, because a lot of us don't have a chance to meet candidates individually and really get to dive into what their thinking is and their strategies are. And I think that the candidates that provide the best online resources and really reflect the mood of the individual voter are going to be successful. For me, I have not personally made a decision on this race because I don't personally know enough about every aspect of every candidate so far. So there's still time.
So you learned a lot today.
Yes. There's still time to make sure these candidates make an impact and move voters in their direction.
I think so. So when am I going to see you at a forum?
In a what?
Aren't you going to be doing your own forums here soon?
I probably will. I am running for Senate in our District 1 for the state legislature. So we're just starting our campaign for office. We're expecting to get a lot going on over the next several months before the May 15th primary. And we want to give people as much access to us. I probably would do it a little bit like Michael Snyder. There will be a lot of videos online of my viewpoints, and we're going to try to get a lot of personal engagement with people, give them an opportunity to get to know me personally as a candidate. And
well, when you have a forum, I want you to tell me. I'll come.
I'll definitely do
I'll come do
that.
that one as well. Are you part of his campaign?
I will be.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
Well, I've got to go mingle, and I think one of your opponents is here too.
Yeah, I know. I saw Jim's here, right?
Huh?
I saw Jim here, Jim Woodward. And
is he here too?
Danielle also here? I saw Danielle as well. Yep.
Yes.
So I think they were both
It'll be interesting, won't it?
It will be, yeah.
It's good talking to you.
Yeah, good talking to you too, Sherry.
Hey, sweetie, how are you? Hey, I got you on camera now. We're live. Did you? That's right. Did you see the whole debate?
No, I wasn't here.
You weren't here?
I just stopped by to say hi.
To me?
Yeah.
Isn't she awesome, folks? Well, you're going to have to go back in and watch this and tell me what you think.
I absolutely will. Thank you for recording.
Oh, you betcha. We're going to go see if we can find a few more people. Looks like everybody's trying to make their way out. We are still looking. Hi! How did the debate go for you?
How are you?
Did you learn something new? Don't go away. I'll get you too.
Some of
I can't hear you real well.
I say I heard some of them speak.
Have you changed your mind?
No, I have to really think about it.
Yeah. We're gonna get you too. You're live right now. I haven't cut off the feed.
Oh, well, your camera stopped.
Yeah, I saw what happened. It's all good. So, did the debate go the way you expected it to? Thank you so much.
Pretty much. I'm a Reagan.
You're a Reagan Republican. You were one of the great people that brought the debate to us. Awesome. Okay. I'm going to be cutting this one off in a minute. I just wanted to get a little general overview as I made my way back. Sorry. Okay, I think my battery is getting a little low, but I think we overall had a great turnout.
Not at all, right?
I did. Don't worry about this. Did you get some good snapshots for me?
I got one of all of them and of the crowd. That was it.
Oh, really? Okay.
This
well,
guy kept getting right in front of me, so I kept moving
yeah,
this over the middle. And
I'm sorry.
that's okay.
Yeah, well, that's okay.
Nothing I can do about it. So.
Yep.
Okay, I'm going to scoot. So.
Okay. Okay, we're going to get a couple more people, and then we're going to cut off. Hold on. Ladies, you're live. And I'd like to hear your feelings on the debate today. Did it turn out the way you expected it to?
Absolutely.
Yeah?
Russ did a wonderful job.
You like Russ? Is everybody in the Russ camp here?
Oh, yes.
Team Russ. Well, I'm seeing all the big R's, and there you go. There you go.
Yes.
I think Russ did real well. Do you think everybody else did just as well? No.
I showed where they're coming from and made it clear as to where they're coming from.
Well, we had some new people online watching today, and they hadn't heard of any of them. So we had some interesting comments. It'd be worthwhile going back and looking through them.
Doing the research.
But I think they all technically presented well, but if you paid attention to what they said, the talking points came out.
That's right.
I think they did.
Some dictators.
Well, hello, darling. Come on over here. Give me a hug.
Do I have to do?
Well, I got your picture anyway.
I know.
Well, I am going to, don't go away. I'm going to cut off the live feed. Everybody wave. This is Redoubt News. Go to redoutnews.com and you'll see it all. Thank you.